Hello everyone, my name is Ahmad and we're going to continue learning Excel 2013. So the first thing that we're going to learn today is how to troubleshoot formulas as we progress through our worksheets. So when a cell is being used to create the value of another cell, it is called the precedent cell. So for instance, if we look at this cell over here, D16, as we can see there's a formula for this in the formula bar. So these cells, D15 and D14, which are being used to create the value for this, so these two cells, they are referred to as precedent cells. So we can actually trace the cells that are being used by clicking on Formulas tab and then clicking on Trace Precedents, which is right here in the Formula Auditing section. So if I click this, then it shows me that to create this cell, this one and this one were used. Similarly for this, trace precedents. So as you can see, this was carried over. For this one, trace precedents, this thing was carried over. We can move down here and we can click on trace precedents once more. You can come down here, trace precedents. So as you can see, as I click on trace precedents, it shows which cells are being combined to get the value. And I can confirm this by clicking on formula bar, and as you can see, these over here, C18 to E18, have been highlighted. Now I can get rid of these arrows by clicking on remove arrows. Similarly, I can also use trace dependents, and what this does is if I was to select a cell and then click on trace dependents, then this shows me where the selected cell is going to be used for. So for instance, if I click trace dependents, then it shows me that this cell is being used to create the value of this cell over here. And I can confirm this by clicking on the final value, and as you can see, this is F16. And my starting was also F16 right here. I can do the same thing down here. So let's just say this 5000 trace dependents. So what this button does again is if I have this cell clicked, then I can use this trace dependents to see where this cell is being used in a formula. Trace dependents, and as we can see, it's being used here. Now if I click this same button again, then it shows further that this information goes here, and then it passes on to create more information, such as this annual sum over here at the end. Another feature that I can use under the Formulas tab is I can click on Show Formulas. So if I click Show Formulas, then as you can see, my spreadsheet actually starts showing me the formulas that are used in cells instead of the actual values. And if I click it again, then the formulas disappear, and now I have my values again. These arrows that I was working with, again, to make them disappear, I'm just going to click on remove arrows. Also, on a side note, you see how when I move my spreadsheet downwards, half of it doesn't change, the top half? This is just a way to look at the information, and I can do this by clicking on the row that I want to not move. So everything above this row is locked, and I can go to view, and then I can click on freeze pane, unfreeze pane. And if I click on unfreeze, then now when I move my mouse on, everything moves, right? But if I want to freeze everything up until right here, Then I just select it, freeze panes, and that's all. You can select this one, unfreeze again, just to show you. Freeze panes. There you go. Additionally, when looking at the data in my spreadsheet, if I see a cell with this little red arrow, that means that a comment has been added over there. Similarly, this green arrow that you see here, over here, this means that there's a possible error. So if I click on the cell, this little exclamation point appears, and if I hover my mouse over it, then it says the formula in this cell differs from the formulas in this area of the spreadsheet. So this is just a warning given to me to make sure that the formula that I have used is correct. I can click on this little arrow and I can ignore the error or edit in the formula bar. I can get help, or I can copy formula from left. Just like we did in Word and PowerPoint, if I want to add a comment such as this one, then I can just click on a cell, go to Review, click on New Comment, and add comment here. If I want to remove a comment, then I can just click on Delete after having that cell selected. So I want to delete this one as well, and I'm just going to click on Delete. If I had multiple comments and I wanted to show all of them at the same time, then I could just click on Show All Comments, and all the comments would appear at the same time. Then I can click this again, and that would hide them again. Now, going back to the other slide that we were working with yesterday. So we did this yesterday, but under View, I can go to Switch Windows and then click on Recommended Charts, and it brings up this one. Now in here, I have this data that we worked with yesterday, and I can go to Insert, and I can insert one of these tabs. If I don't know which tab I should be using, then I can click on Recommended Charts, and I have to select the data. So I have to ensure that my cell selected is part of the table, and then I'm going to click on Recommended Charts, and now it gives me a few options. And let's go with this one. I'm going to press OK, and this shows up. A brief description of the different types of charts available to me are available on page 85 of the textbook. As you can see here also, is that I have a lot more data here than is actually shown on the chart. So what I have to do is move the chart a little bit up and then expand it. And now as you can see, it shows everything. And as I change the size of the chart, then I can ensure that all the data is there, and I can also make sure that these values appear the way that I want them to. So for instance, right now these values are really cluttered, and if I expand it horizontally, then now these values have become a lot neater. I can click on the chart title and call it something else. For companies, and I can also carry this chart over to Word or PowerPoint. After having created this chart, if I don't like this specific type, then I can click on Change Chart Type, and I can select a new one. I can also switch the rows and the columns. So if I press this, then the view completely changes, and so now it's showing Q2 sales here and Q1 sales here. But this chart is a lot more difficult to read than this one, so I'm going to stick with this. Again, I can change the style of it from up here. Let's go with this one. And while I have the chart selected, if I want to just delete it, then I can just hit the delete button on my keyboard and it disappears. I can go back to Insert and from this menu, I can specifically pick the type of chart that I want. So I don't have to use the recommended charts options. So let's go with this one. See here how in this chart would look okay to me, but see all these names of the companies that is cluttering the horizontal axis. Then what I can do is in the chart tools, in the design tab, I can move my mouse over here to the left where it says add chart elements, go to axes, and this one is already selected, and if I hover my mouse over it, it disappears. So see where all these names were? If I hover my mouse, it disappears. I can also make the vertical values disappear if I hover my mouse over it, and then if I click it. Finally, I can change the depth, as you can see here. But for now, I'm just going to get rid of all the names down here that is cluttering up the area. I'm going to call it chart for now. Back to axis. There we go. To gain a deeper understanding on the specific parts of the chart, everyone should read page 87 because that explains the specific points or the specific elements of the chart itself. We have gone over them before, so I will not repeat, but the information is pretty important and it is on page 87. After having created this chart, if I want to make it completely separate sheet for this, because let's just say that this feels too cluttered for me, then in the design tab, what I can do is click on move chart, but I have to make sure that the chart itself is selected before doing this. So it's selected. Now I click on move chart and I can place it in a new sheet, and let's call this chart 2 sheet, and I'm going to press OK. And as you can see, my sheet 1 is here. This is the information that I was working with, and this chart 2 sheet down here, this is where my chart has moved to. Of course, I can change the order of these if I wish. So sheet 1 is here, chart 2 is here. Now, in this view, as I place it in a new sheet, and let's call this, then in the design tab, what I can do is click on move chart, but I have to make sure that the chart itself is selected before doing this. So it's selected. Now I click on move chart and I can place it in a new sheet, and let's call this chart 2 sheet, and I'm going to press OK. And as you can see, my sheet 1 is here. This is the information that I was working with, and this chart 2 sheet down here, this is where my chart has moved to. Of course, I can change the order of these if I wish. So sheet 1 is here, chart 2 is here. Now, in this view, as I hover my mouse over this icon here, as you can see, it says chart elements. So when the chart itself is selected, these options are going to appear. So I am going to click on chart elements, and this allows me to edit the things that I showed you before. So primary, horizontal. So these are the names of the companies that I deleted before. I'll just add them for now, and then I'm going to get rid of them again. Same way, these are the primary vertical. They have disappeared. I'm going to make them appear again. Chart title, disappeared, appeared. So these chart elements, they control the way your graph looks, and it allows you to show the information that you want and hide the information that you don't want to show. This over here allows me to change the chart style. So if I click it, let's change it to this for now. This here, these are chart filters, and these are all the name of the companies that I'm showing in this chart, and I can hide this one, let's say, if I wish. Now it disappears. I have access to additional settings. So if I click on this, click on the little arrow and then more options. So I've got more options that appear here. This is very detailed and allows me to do many different things. You guys should go over these individually to control the looks and the type of data that you want to show on your chart. The one thing that is actually notably useful in many different charts such as these is data labels. So when I click it, it actually shows the exact value of each one of these lines. So depending on the type of chart and information you're trying to show, this data labels could be very useful. Data table could also be included at the bottom, but as you can see, the more things that we add, the more cluttered it gets. So I'll include that and take that out instead. So let's leave it like this for now. Now we're going to start learning about pivot tables. So pivot tables allow us to analyze numeric data in depth. So it's used for very detailed analysis. So let's just say that I've got this spreadsheet here that lists sports, the quarter sales, and which quarters, 3 or 4, the sales were in. And I want to display this data in a more meaningful manner that will allow me to analyze the data that I'm looking at. So what I can do is I can select my data, go to Insert tab, click on Recommended Pivot Tables. And this first one is picked by default, and this is the preview of it. If I click on this one, then it shows me another preview. This one shows me another preview. But I'm going to go with the first one. So I press OK. And it opens in a new sheet. So this is my actual data. And this is the pivot table. And as the book says, when we're working with pivot tables and pivot charts, remember that we're not actually changing the structure of our original data. So you can experiment as heavily as you like with this. Like you can change whatever and you're not actually affecting the data, and we can actually reset all the data that we see in here if something goes wrong, as I will show you how. So anyway, if I select one of these cells in here in the pivot chart, then this appears over here to the right, this panel. And in here I can make sports, quarter, or sales disappear. What I can also do is see how sports is in rows right now. So this is sport 1 and this is sport 2. So as you can see, it shows in rows, and I can actually change this to the column. And now tennis is here, golf is here. But this does not look neat at all, so I will just go over here, change the sport back to rows. I could have done the same thing by clicking on the arrow and then clicking on move to column labels. Once again, click on the arrow and move to row labels. Similarly, I can show sum of sales, and I can move this to the columns instead. But I don't like this, so I'm going to bring it back down to rows. When we have the pivot table selected, this pivot table tools appear over here. Now I'm going to click on Analyze, and what I can do from here is I can refresh it. So this is what I was talking about. So let's just say if I had made a mistake in here somewhere, then I can just click on refresh and it refreshes. So when you guys are experimenting, try to change different things. Then you can click on refresh, refresh all, and it'll bring it back to the default. In the design section, I can change the way the table looks, its aesthetics, and I'll let you guys play around with that. I can also change the source of the data of this pivot table. But if I click here in the analyze portion, change data source, and now see how it says sheet 1 and then it's A1 to C8? It's referring to this, A1 to C8. And I can change this to, let's just say, only this much. And press OK. And now the data has changed. Once again, change data. Now we'll select the entire thing. Press OK. There we go. Using the data within this pivot table, so this is my data, can go back to insert and click on pivot chart. This allows me to open a chart like this. I could have done the exact same thing by clicking, instead of insert, I can just go to analyze and click on pivot chart or recommended pivot tables. So this allows me to change it again, but I don't want to do that. I can just click on pivot chart and select this column chart, bar graph, and here we go. I can sort. I can also change the sport of it. So let's just say I don't want to see tennis anymore, only golf. And this symbol shows that there's a filter that is applied. There we go. Keep in mind that to create this sort of graph, I don't actually have to convert it to a pivot table first. So if I go back to my data, so this is the original data that I was working with. By going into the insert tab, I can just click on pivot chart right here and then pivot chart. I can also create both at the same time, but let's go with pivot chart and new worksheet. It's okay. And this allows me to add it like this, and now I can change the way it looks by myself. So we can change the quick layout. Let's go with this. And type, I will leave it the same. So you can play around with these additional options that appear. Now I'm going to show you guys what macros are. So just go back to this spreadsheet when you're practicing this. I'm going to zoom in. So click on File, go to Options, Customize Ribbon, and then where it says Developer, make sure that this is checkmarked and press OK. Now we have this Developer tab that appears that wasn't there before. So when you click it, use this, use relative references, and then click on Record Macro. Give your macro a name. I'm going to leave it to macro 3, and I'm going to save it in this workbook. Although you can also save it in personal macro workbook, which means that it would get carried over to any Excel spreadsheet that you're working with. But I don't want to change the settings permanently, so I'm going to work with this workbook. I'm going to press OK. And now, as you can see up there, the macro is recording. And what this allows me to do is I'm going to type up a formula. So equal sign, sum, all of these, close the bracket, and there's the answer. I'm going to do the same thing here. Or rather, I'll show you how to do this here without having to do it manually. So now that my macro has been recorded. I'm going to click on stop recording. Now what I can do is come down here, click on where it says macros, and we just recorded macro 3. I'm going to click run, and it has done this. Another thing that I can show you is macros number 3. I'm going to delete it. I will also delete number 2 so everything clears and no one is confused about anything. So let's go and do that again. Okay, so I'm going to make sure that use relative references is selected. Okay, so right now it's not selected, now it is selected. Now what I'm going to do is, while this cell over here is selected, I'm going to click on record macro, and let's call it macro 1. Okay, I'm going to save it in this. I can also add a shortcut key. Let's make it Control Q. I'm going to press OK. And now I'm going to type up a function. So I'm going to use the sum function. I want to sum all of these up. Also, I'm going to go home and I'm going to click on bold and also make sure the currency is selected. Now I'm going to go back, stop recording. There we go. So the macro has been saved. I can make sure of this by clicking on macros, and there it is, macros 1. Now, having the second cell selected, if I click run, let's see if the macro works. As you can see, the macro works over here. I can also press Control Q, Control Q, Control Q, Control Q. So if you're working with a really large spreadsheet, such as something like this, then using macros, we can make our lives a lot easier, because then we don't have to actually, select each line every single time. Or let's just say that some of them need to be summed up and others need to be averaged over here, and then sum again. So what I'm talking about is, if it was all sum, let's just say from top all the way to bottom, if we were using the exact same formula, then this sort of thing would work that we've been working with, where I click this little corner and I drag it down and everything works perfect, right? But let's just say that some of them need to be sums, whereas others need to be average or product, something else. Then I can use the macros for those. So I can have a macro for pretty much any function that I want. For instance, let's just say that I want to have some company names in all capital letters. So I can add a function and I can create a macro for that. So what the macro would allow me to do is convert these names of the specific ones that I want into all capital letters without having to actually go and type up the formula again and again. So this is in the developer options.